So just so you know that you will be able to access the recording of this webinar after the fact on our website and on the FACC website. We would like, so you should all be able to see the shared, Myriam's shared screen. If you want to make everybody else's faces disappear, if you don't know how to do that already, if you put your cursor on Myriam's photo or Myriam's image and go to the top right side, you'll see a little drop down menu. And when you pull that down, you should see pin presentation. And then you should only see then her photo, her image, and the presentation. And then if you are on the presentation image, you should be able to switch to reverse the images so that you're seeing the presentation on your entire screen and just Myriam's image on the side of your screen. And you can play around with that so that you don't have to be distracted by everybody else who's on the webinar. So just a quick introduction. Thank you very much to Myriam Le Cannellier, founder and co-director of DSML Executive Search. They have offices in Chicago and in Boston. DSML is an executive search firm that recruits CEOs, VPs, and sales executives in the US for European and Canadian companies. We're very happy to have you today on this really interesting topic. Thank you. I'm going to mute myself now and turn it over to you. Thanks.
Thank you, Andrea, and thank you for organizing this webinar. I'm happy to talk about this and share our experience recruiting virtually. In fact, I would say that 70% of our searches are conducted virtually. We don't meet candidates in person because we have searches that happen across the US, in other states. So it's not new to us. We have a lot of experience, so our team has been also providing additional tips to the content of this webinar that I'm happy to share with you today. Also very timely, I was reading a recent survey that came out today from an HR company in Chicago. They were surveying a number of companies right now, and it happens that some companies are still hiring, even in this very difficult time. And 78% of the firms that are hiring right now are actually doing it virtually. So I think this topic is extremely timely. I will start with the objectives of this short presentation. So really want to go about the benefits of hiring virtually, because it might be a little counterintuitive, but there are a number of benefits in doing this. And also go over best practices and share tips with you, giving you enough time at the end. The presentation is short on purpose so that you can ask questions after that. So benefits of hiring virtually. You see them here summarized. I think the first one, and this is one that we have experienced ourselves a lot, is that you can have different people from different locations participating in the process in a very convenient and easy way. We often conduct searches where different people from the hiring side, from the client side, are located in Europe, in different places in Europe, and in different places in the US. Again, when you do virtual hiring, it's extremely easy to have all these people participate in the process. By doing that also, you're going to save a lot of time and money because you'll cut on travel expenses from the candidate side, but also from the client side. And you can have a very smooth process in terms of time where at the end, you could be more efficient in the outcome. Another one benefit that maybe is not that obvious to people, and that benefit will apply mainly when a position is a remote position. At the end of the day, if someone is going to be based from home, you can really increase the scope of candidates you can consider for a specific role, because at the end, again, no one is going anywhere to meet in person. You can have a much bigger pool of candidates potentially. So that's another benefit. And at the end also, I think the main benefit is that it's by doing virtual hiring, it's conducive to be more efficient and well prepared in the overall process of your of your recruitment. So the next phase of this presentation is to really go over the best practices, and we'll go for each of them in a little more detail with some examples. So here is a summary of the different best practices we'll discuss: the process, the communication, the way you communicate and you showcase your company, which is an important piece, and ultimately how you can train and test yourself and the hiring team to make sure that it goes smoothly and efficiently. I'll start with the process. The process is extremely important in hiring anyway, but it's even more important when you're not going to be able to meet people in person and when you're not going to have this physical interaction in your office or in your plant or in your lab. So the first step we suggest in the process is to really have an internal task force on the hiring side with a very limited number of people. You don't want to have too many people. 3, 4 is probably a good rule. As much as possible with someone from HR. It's not always possible. Some companies don't have HR, but if you do, that's the best practice. And to make sure that you're going to really decide exactly what will be the process, the different steps, the people involved in the decision-making process, when there will be a video interview, how many video interviews, the tools, everything has to be discussed at the beginning. This morning, in fact, I was talking with an engineering company. We're discussing the start of a new search. This is a company that operates in 6 countries. They are headquartered in France, and they have a very multicultural team. And they were telling me that even before the current situation, they have been hiring everyone virtually in the different countries where they operate. They're used to it. They have a solid process in place. They use Skype meetings, and they say for them, it works very well. So we have numerous examples of companies that operate that way. It's important also when you discuss the process to really decide which position is going to be offered without meeting in person. Because for me, there's a little bit of a distinction between hiring virtually, doing your entire process, but maybe at the very end, deciding that for some position, you need at some point to have an in-person meeting with the candidate at the very end. But you also have situations, and that's a little bit the purpose of the presentation today, where you can decide that for this specific position, it's not necessary, and the position ultimately can be offered without meeting in person. We have an example, for example, in 2014, so it's a long time ago, we worked for a tech company that was looking for a senior finance controller in the US. The position was to report to headquarters in France and also had reporting to the local general manager in the US, but ultimately the decision maker was the headquarters in France. They had a process in place, and they decided that they didn't need to meet the person in a face-to-face interview. What they did, though, is that they added, and I think it was very useful, they added a step where they had another executive from another country, another market, who also was part of the process to kind of enrich the evaluation of the candidate. Ultimately, the person was hired and successfully hired, promoted several times, has been with the company since then, and now is the CFO of the US operation. So it's another example I'm sharing to show that it's possible. In terms of the process, the process about the interview, the video interviewing also has to be specifically anticipated and well prepared. Obviously, that's an obvious one. You need to really choose the tool that you're going to use, know that tool, know the technical limitations, know how to use it, and make sure it works for everyone within your company, especially if people are in different locations, And also you need to make sure you have a backup method in case it doesn't work when you do the interview with the candidates. In terms of the process, there's another piece that is very, very important, is that you need to clarify, especially with your task force at the beginning, the role itself. What is the expectation in terms of remote work or place of work? Because again, there's a slight difference between the process itself of hiring someone virtually, but then ultimately, where is the person expected to work in the future, at the time of hire and then in the future? And it's something that needs to be clarified, because you don't want to have run the risk of a misalignment between the expectation of a candidate and your expectation as a hiring company. And we've seen that sometimes. If it's not clarified at the beginning, you may have a situation where the candidate was left under the impression that the job was fully remote, for example, and then suddenly you're asking someone to come to an office or to go to a certain place, and it's not been discussed. That's a point I wanted to emphasize today. You need also in your process to really be prepared to sell your company even more than you would do in person. The reason is, sorry, I think I went too fast, my slide. The reason is when you meet in person in your own location, in your own office, in your own store, in your own lab, people can feel, can experience a lot just by visiting your place. When you only do a virtual interview, you need to provide them way more information to sell and to showcase your company. At the very end of your process, there's another step that is probably even more essential when you don't have a chance to, again, meet in person, which is to make sure you perform a solid background check, and also that you check the professional references of the candidates. The second part of the best practices today is around the communication. Communication is extremely important anyway, but again, in this situation of hiring virtually, communication will be even more important because you need to adjust it, you need to adapt it to this new way of working. Keep in mind, there are two reasons that justify to really improve your communication. First, you have to put yourself in the shoes of the candidate for 1 minute. Right now, candidates themselves, so you could be a candidate, are probably a little more nervous about the whole situation, and are also a little more nervous about joining a company if they don't have a chance to, again, meet the hiring manager or the hiring committee in person, or to visit the location. So because of that, you need to think about that piece whenever you interact with the candidates. Also, you need to acknowledge that for some people, being hired virtually is going to be something new. They've never maybe experienced it in the past, and they might have questions about it that you need to be prepared to address. One aspect to really improve your communication is to make sure that the process that you have established at the beginning, you're going to follow up with emails, reminders that you send the correct invitation to the candidates. All that has to be really done in a very timely and efficient way. You want also to communicate to the candidates early on what will the process look like. There's nothing worse when you're a candidate and you don't know exactly what's ahead. You don't know how many interviews, with whom. So that's something you want to clarify also at the beginning when you start interacting with candidates. And then when you invite candidates for virtual interviews, you want to make sure with them that they know who they're going to interview with in terms of their name, their role, and again, their step in the process. You probably also have to acknowledge that candidates may have just practical technical questions. We see that all the time ourselves. We deal with candidates who become a little nervous before a video interview with a client. Sometimes they will call us before to check, you know, how should I prepare? What does the tool look like? I've never used Zoom before. I've never used Microsoft Teams. So be prepared to address those questions from candidates. You also need to check that there is a good compatibility of your tool with people in general and the candidate that you are going to interview. I'll give you just a simple example. Some tools are not yet very easy to use on a phone, for example. So you may have a candidate who doesn't have a personal laptop at home. They only have a work laptop. They're not comfortable, or they can't use it for a job interview with another company. They want to use a tablet or a phone. Just check that the tool that you're going to use for that video interview is compatible with what they have. The next part is about showcasing your company. So again, and put yourself again in the shoes of a candidate. You want to know as much as possible about the company before joining that company eventually. So you probably should prepare in advance documentation that you're going to share with the candidate. It could be a presentation that you share during an interview, the same way I'm sharing my screen right now, using that presentation. You could imagine doing this in an interview where you share a PowerPoint presentation or a short video or something like this. You could consider having a virtual tour of your company, especially if we're talking about a plant or lab, something that will make a difference if people can see it or experience it. So it's something you could prepare in advance. It becomes also something you could reuse when you do social media, for example. It could be also a testimonial from existing employees that you can share as a video, just to give a sense of the culture of the organization, but also give them a taste of what to expect, and also in some respect, sell again the company to the candidates. The sharing the screen, you want to make sure people know how to do it, by the way. You may want to send documents after the interview, not to everyone, but for example, the candidates that you really are interested in, you want to make sure they are also interested. And so following up with sending them something is generally a good practice. The last piece is about the training, and the training of your team, the training and the testing. So you need to make sure, obviously, you choose a reliable tool and a consistent tool across the organization. There's nothing worse where, and we've seen that situation in the past, sometimes in an organization where even a few hours before an interview, it's not very clear if someone is going to use Skype or if someone is going to use something else. You want to adopt a tool across the organization, make sure everyone is using it, is trained to use it. And you need to train people because, you know, you probably especially the last couple of days that everyone is working remotely, I'm sure you've all been witnessing what it is to be in a presentation where you have people who don't really understand how to use the tool. They tell you that, no, I don't have that feature on my screen. It's generally because they're not trained or they don't know how to use it. So you want to make sure, again, that it doesn't happen on your side, because otherwise you don't give a very nice impression to a candidate. And also you want to minimize the stress for everyone. You want to eventually practice interview where you have at least 2 interviewers. So the picture I chose is actually really not relevant to our current situation, because you're not going to have 2 people interviewing together in the same room. But you could perfectly, with all the tools available, have 2 different interviewers in two different locations, currently working from their homes, and interviewing a candidate at the same time. What is interesting when you do that is that you can have someone who is really leading, conducting the interview, and someone else who is taking notes. It is a little more tricky when you interview a candidate to be at the same time interviewing, interacting with the person, and taking notes. So that's why having a note taker can be useful and a good practice. In terms of the location, since people are all working from home, you want to make sure that, again, you select a good location, quiet, pretty neutral. You want to make sure there's a background that is appropriate. Some tools, and it's the case with Microsoft Teams, allow you to blurry the background, for example, which can be convenient if you don't have the right background behind you. You want to make sure you minimize distractions, and you train your team to do it. Again, you don't want to have someone with the phone buzzing around, because you don't convey the best impression to your candidates. You want to check the lighting, and more than anything else, I said it before, you want to make sure that people understand all the features of the tool. So that leaves us to a little bit of the conclusion of this presentation, and I hope that you will have a lot of questions for me. Nothing replaces, I think, in-person interactions and in-person interviews. They're really the nicest that they want to do, but there is a bright side in hiring virtually. You can save money, you can save time, and I think the best outcome is also that you can improve your process. So ultimately, the decision is yours, but I think with the current situation and the possibility that's going to extend, it's probably a good time for any company to reconsider their practices and look at all these cost benefit and risk, and reassess and decide that some of the position can be definitely recruited virtually successfully. So I'm probably going to turn to Ludivine to see if you have received questions.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Myriam. Indeed, a question about what are the pros and cons of video versus phone interview?
That's a good one. That's a very good one. So in our experience, what we do is we do both. And I would always suggest to do both. I think the first contact that a company or hiring manager has can perfectly be on the phone. You get a first feel for the person. It's interesting because what we see is that phone is less intimidating for some people, and for others it's actually more intimidating. But generally, there's a general practice in the US where you could start with a phone conversation, and then if you decide to move forward, then include the video interview, which is a little more personal, where you have more interaction because there's the body language. You get a little bit of a window. If you think about it, you have a little bit of a window into someone's life, because you obviously, I can't hide, I'm not just in front of a white wall. So it's a little more personal than just the phone. With the phone though, what's interesting is you just focus on the listening, the voice and the answer of the person, as opposed to the video where you have a little more info that you could use to make your evaluation of the candidate. But I would suggest the use of both. I think they both have benefits. They complement each other, and at the end you have more information that you could use to make your assessment.
Thank you. Another question about, is there any specific question that you would recommend to ask in a virtual interview that you would not usually ask during an in-person interview?
I guess there are several questions. First, and you could say it doesn't have to do with the virtual interview so much, but it has to do with virtual in general. One question definitely I would recommend is, do you have previous experience working remotely? And I would ask the person to elaborate the answer. So depending on the answer, I would follow up by asking, what have you learned from it? Do you have do's and don'ts from your experience working remotely? And I would really, as an interviewer, make sure that I get the most out of that question. I would ask them, how do they organize themselves? I would also have a question. Another suggestion is, since we are not going to meet in person in this process, if it goes forward, do you have any reservation or any concern regarding this opportunity that I can help you with? Again, I feel this is something that because we are in our everyday jobs in between hiring companies and candidates, I can tell you that I think the process of hiring virtually can generate some concerns and additional question from candidates. So it's in the interest of the interviewer to really dig into that, to check if the person has, maybe a question mark or a reservation about the company or something they want to know. So go after that question. I would add that question.
Hello, Myriam. This is Odile in Minneapolis. Myriam, how can we make international candidates international candidates feel at ease, assuming there is a time difference, and that's granted, but maybe not realizing that access to communication may be different based on whom we interview, where in the world. How can we maybe pre-assess and prepare ourselves for interviewing interesting candidates who may not have access to technology the way we do?
So you mean if, for example, from here, you are going to interview someone in a different country with less access to technology? Is that your question?
Yes. How do we not penalize anyone for, matching up to our calendar and honoring an interview at a certain time of the day or night, but maybe pre-understanding that the connection abilities may be different from what we take for granted here.
Yeah, I see different things in your question, if I got the question right. And that's part of it has to do with the process and the preparation, the communication I was referring to earlier. Because of that, you never know. You're right. In fact, even in the US, just this week, I had issues myself in my own home with the internet was not good enough. I couldn't do 2 meetings. I had to really get away from the meeting and just be on a phone conversation. So it can happen anywhere, I think, where the connection is not very good. So that's why you need to, as a company, as the one leading or hiring, you need to really choose a tool that has some versatility. So it's either a tool that is very extremely easy to use, can be used on a phone, for example. So you have so many people who don't necessarily have a very upgraded laptop that they can use for a job interview. A phone is pretty easy to use. I've seen, in fact, candidates doing video interviews on their phone in their cars, and it works very well. And I think it was not even using Wi-Fi; it was probably using their, their mobile phone plan. So nowadays, it's pretty easy to do that, but you still need to check. You still need to check earlier with the candidate. Have you used that tool before? If not, can we do a trial, or do you have questions? So you need to acknowledge that. And you also need to have a backup plan. That's what I said earlier, where eventually, worst case scenario, it doesn't work. You shouldn't be extra frustrated. You should say, okay, this is not going to work today. Let's just do a phone call. And that's fine too. It has happened in my experience. It's not a reason why, shouldn't move forward. So I hope I'm addressing your question.
Yes, absolutely, Myriam. I just didn't know if maybe there was a cheat sheet, that could be handed or shared prior to make sure that we do not create additional stress when we do international interviews.
Mm-hmm. I've seen, to be honest, it would be not realistic to say that it will work 100% perfectly in 100% of the situations. I've seen even cases where you prepare, and the day off something happens on the side of the client or the side of the candidates that is unexpected. It doesn't work, and generally what people do is that they either decide to reschedule, which is always an option, or they decide to do a phone call, and they will follow up with a video later on when there are better conditions. But I think there's always a way out, especially when you are prepared for it, and you acknowledge that it's possible, that it will happen sometimes.
Myriam, we have another question from Gabrielle, who is a member of FACC. Do you think that a virtual recruitment process has an impact on the inboarding process?
I think yes, it has. You need to have probably to adjust your onboarding process because, again, there was no in-person interaction. I have in mind, we have a client that we've worked for several years. It's in the medical device space. And for this client, we have recruited over time, for example, clinical research associates and clinical research and clinical account specialists. These positions by nature are generally remote anyway. People work from home and then go to sites or to hospitals. They travel sometimes. So obviously right now, all that is a little different because people can't travel that much, but still those people do their job from their homes. And in multiple instances, they've been hired without meeting in person. They've been hired virtually. But when they start their job, there is a special process in onboarding in place from the company. Where they are going to be even more on a regular basis in touch with the person. And generally, at some point, there is still a meeting in person. Someone from the company is going to meet with these people. Right now, again, with the context that we're experiencing, it's going to be extremely challenging. But what I'm seeing with some of the companies we work with is that they have to adjust. They have to change a little bit their onboarding and having more opportunities for the new hire to interact via video mostly with the colleagues or the team in the company so that they get faster onboarding in some respect, even if they can't meet in person. So yes, the answer is yes, you have to adjust.
Myriam, and this is going to be our last question. So do you see any difference hiring depending on the position? Do you see a difference, hiring an entry-level person, a middle manager, a C-level executive in virtual interviews?
Yes, I was prepared for that question, and actually I think my answer, and it's only my personal opinion based on our experience. I think there's a difference depending on the position. So I see two ways of answering this question. First, there is a difference in terms of the level. It is probably unlikely that you're going to recruit the president or the CEO of a company without any in-person interview at some point with someone. I don't think it will happen. I would be surprised. I may be wrong, but generally my experience has been at some point there is some sort of in-person interaction. And it's going to probably be true for a number of C-level positions where you also have the leadership skills and ability that are measured and evaluated, and it's a little more complicated when you don't have the in-person interactions. For a mid-level position, I think it really depends also on the function. Some roles are much easier to recruit without meeting in person than others. For example, the examples I used earlier, I think in finance, in some very technical roles, it's probably easier to recruit without meeting in person. I think even in sales and business development, you also can recruit without necessarily meeting in person. I actually have an example, a biotech company last year. We helped them find a business development director, and the hiring team was in Europe. They couldn't travel for several reasons, and they did a series of different video interviews. They hired, and it works well. So some of the roles you could definitely do it. And then the entry-level position is, I think, even easier to do without necessarily meeting in person, especially now that you have all sorts of tools available. I was reading yesterday a very interesting article about retail, for example. In the retail world, where you have people who have jobs with a limited set of skill, where the pay is not very high, you can perfectly imagine having a very solid process where you video interview people and hire them, and then they start, and you see when they start, you see quite quickly if they do the job or not. So in the field of entry-level position, I think it is going to probably even increase now in terms of using virtual hiring. Don't forget, and it's a long answer to the question, but there is also new tools coming using AI, and these tools are also going to be conducive to develop the virtual hiring. So I think it really depends on the level and also on the role itself. It's a mix of both.
Thank you, Myriam. A last question has arrived in the meantime from another participant. So when virtually hiring, do you change your expectations for how the candidate should dress for the interview?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think it's very personal. In my case, we are not too much, and I think I speak for our team, we care way more about how a candidate is engaged, prepared, is curious, asks questions, answers with examples. more than the way they dress. Obviously, if someone is really in their pajamas for, a work interviews, you might notice, you might say, hey, but the fact that they are wearing, a t-shirt or a shirt or a suit, personally, I don't think it's a big deal, but again, it depends also a little bit on the role, I guess. But we're not paying attention to that as much. I think you'd rather have someone who's they're very genuine, they're wearing whatever they have, as long as it's good look, it's okay looking, but they are really engaged, and again, they answer the questions well, and they feel motivated, than someone in a suit who is not able to answer correctly the question you're asking, or is not providing examples. So.
Thank you, Myriam. So this was our last question, and I will turn over to Andrea for some final announcements. Thank you all.
Thank you. Just not much more. Thank you very much, Myriam, for your presentation today. This will be interesting to see how this topic evolves over the next couple of months. I'm sure that that your suggestions and tips will become more and more useful and more important as the time goes on. We will have a series of webinars on HR related topics, including one in 2 weeks to be announced very shortly. I believe we said the 16th of April, but you can look on the FACC Chicago and the FACC website for more details very soon. It will include the trends in hiring, and as we're going through this crisis, and we might be joined by a labor law professional as well. Thank you all very much for being here today. We will follow up with everyone, send a follow-up email. Again, the recording of this webinar will be on our websites and available within a few hours, at least by tomorrow morning, to give us time to put it up. Be well, and feel free to contact us with any follow-up questions, or Myriam. Thanks again.
Andrea, Ludivine, Myriam, is there time for one more question?
Myriam, if you're willing to take a question, if anybody else has to get off, please feel free.
Thank you, Myriam. Thank you, Andrea. Thank you, Ludivine. This is Odile in Minneapolis. Prior to the crisis, I learned from a few of our younger generation candidates that there were some awesome interview experiences done virtually online. Mm-hmm. And being a mother of a 20-plus-year-old, it fascinates me to listen to some of this feedback. Is there any platform or anything that's existing with anyone here at the FACC level or FACC business members level to kind of gather some testimonials of interviewees who, out of the blue, volunteered information as to why this interview was the most efficient interview they could have ever imagined. And this means, online or whatever. It's the new generation does not necessarily expect a face-to-face, mm-hmm. but hearing the new generation saying it was such an efficient, I think the new generation interviews probably 100 plus, job, whatever, candidatures, or you know what I mean.
Yeah.
And can volunteer.
Okay. Odile? I lost you, Odile, so I don't know if you're still there.
Odile, you've muted yourself. Can you unmute yourself, please?
Sorry, I don't know how that happened. I apologize.
It's okay.
How can we possibly gather those testimonials from a new generation that maybe does not expect a face-to-face and yet is able to express and value any kind of interview in any format because they go through 100+ applications, and then we'll end up sharing with you being any one of us what made the difference. Is there any platform that exists where we could gather these kind of very precious testimonials as to what makes the difference in a job interview?
It's a tough question. I think right now out there are a lot of new tools. Even ourselves, we've been using some tools even a few years ago. So it's been there for a while. And then you have to look at what companies are using right now. I think companies, especially larger companies, are really testing all these tools.
Right.
If you have, I think my suggestion would be if you took the example of your son, I think, but if you know people who have been using those tools as candidates and they like them, just forward the information. Maybe someone can write an article or can share. These platforms are, I think, increasing in popularity, and they're going, obviously right now, this is going to be used even more. My own daughter, for a summer job recently, she was interviewed like that. She had no interaction whatsoever with no one. She had to record herself. And I think it's a new trend, especially again for young professionals, entry-level jobs, hourly jobs, maybe not so much for a management position yet.
Okay, I was just amazed because, of course, we as FACCs are facilitators also and facilitate connections between candidates and companies, either because we post job postings or because we post candidates. But getting feedback about young professionals telling us that this was the most amazing, efficient interview they have ever had is very, very, very interesting, because they've usually gone through quite a few interviews, and they themselves have rated the company based on the quality of the interview. And I wish I could capture this, because there is a generation gap, and what is perceived, as being an amazing interview experience by a young professional, it may be very different from what we perceive as as a quote quote mature employer.
But it's good news if you think about it. It's good news for the companies who are questioning their practice and trying to see if they have to go virtual. So it's encouraging for them to see that the newer generation don't have any problem with it. I think you're right. It's probably the future for a lot of the recruitment.
And what we may be doubtful of may be actually value added to some.
Mm-hmm. So I guess this concludes the...
Great, yes. Thank you again. And thanks to those of you who stayed for the rest of the conversation. We look forward to seeing many of you again soon, and you'll get a follow-up email from us shortly after this. Thanks again, Myriam.
Thank you, Myriam.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.